The first thing I noticed wasn't your presence, it was the absence of noise around you. Most people arrive carrying something loud with them, a need to be seen, a need to be understood immediately, a need to leave an impression strong enough to secure a place in someone's attention before silence exposes how temporary they really are. You didn't arrive like that. You arrived quietly, not distant, not hesitant, just still, like someone who didn't need to force significance because significance had never depended on volume for you. And I think that's why I noticed you faster than I should have. Not because you demanded attention, but because you didn't. There's something unsettling about people who can exist without trying to shape the room around them. Most people unconsciously bend toward recognition. They adjust themselves constantly, through words, through reactions, through performance, until the version of them that others receive becomes more important than the version quietly existing underneath. You never performed, at least not for me, and I notice things like that. I always have, probably because I spent most of my life doing the opposite, not performing in an obvious way, but constructing, carefully, intentionally, building layers strong enough that people could interact with me without ever reaching anything essential underneath. Not because I wanted deception, not because I enjoyed distance, because distance protects accuracy. The closer people get, the more they start replacing reality with interpretation. They stop seeing what's actually there and begin seeing what they need to see instead. Their own fears, their own assumptions, their own unfinished narratives projected onto someone else's existence. I learned early that clarity disappears once people become emotionally invested in their version of you. So I adapted. I became readable enough to exist socially, but unreadable enough to remain intact. It worked for years, until you. And the disturbing part is that you didn't break through those walls. You noticed the space behind them without touching them at all. That shouldn't happen. People don't usually recognize what isn't being shown to them directly. They respond to presentation, to expression, to behavior. They build conclusions from what's visible. You responded to what wasn't visible. That's what changed everything. At first, I ignored it, not because I didn't feel it, because I did, immediately. But immediate recognition is dangerous. Immediate recognition bypasses logic, and I don't trust things that bypass logic too easily. So, I observed, quietly, the same way I observe everything, before deciding whether it belongs anywhere near me. And what I noticed unsettled me more with time, not less. You never pushed, never searched for weak points, never tried to decode me like some puzzle waiting to reward curiosity with intimacy. You simply existed with a level of awareness that made explanation unnecessary. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people demand translation. They need constant clarification, emotional simplification, verbal reassurance. They panic when something exists outside their ability to categorize it quickly. You didn't. You let things remain complex without trying to reduce them into something easier to hold, and because of that, I started lowering my guard in ways I didn't notice immediately, not outwardly, internally. That's the important distinction. Externally, nothing changed much. I still spoke carefully, still maintained control, still moved through conversations with the same precision I always have. But internally, the structure shifted. I stopped filtering certain thoughts before they reached you, stopped calculating how something would be interpreted before saying it, stopped preparing myself for misunderstanding. That last part matters more than anything else. because I am always prepared to be misunderstood, always, not out of pessimism, out of pattern recognition. People hear through themselves, even when they try not to, even when they care. Their perception bends around their own experiences until accuracy becomes almost impossible. But with you, there were moments where accuracy existed naturally, effortlessly, and those moments stayed with me longer than they should have. I remember one silence specifically, not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. We stopped speaking for a moment, and most people would rush to fill it. They would have mistaken stillness for awkwardness. They would have searched for words just to reassure themselves the connection was still functioning. You didn't. You stayed there with me inside the silence itself. Not uncomfortable, not impatient, just present. And for some reason, that affected me more deeply than any conversation could have. Because silence reveals people. Anyone can sound intelligent when words are available. Anyone can create closeness through expression. But silence exposes whether two minds can exist together without needing constant confirmation, or as could. And once I realized that, something in me started recalibrating around you, slowly, quietly, irreversibly. I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe I was projecting significance onto coincidence because the connection felt unfamiliar. Human perception does that sometimes. It creates patterns where none exist, simply because we want meaning badly enough. But this wasn't that. I know the difference between imagined alignment and actual alignment. Imagined alignment feels exciting. Actual alignment feels inevitable. That's what this felt like. Not intense, not chaotic, not obsessive, just inevitable. Like recognizing a structure you somehow already understood before seeing it fully. And the more I noticed it, the more dangerous it became. Because once inevitability enters your perception, control starts slipping in subtle ways. You stop resisting things you normally would have resisted automatically. You stop creating distance where distance once felt necessary. You stop protecting spaces inside yourself because some deeper instinct has already decided protection is no longer required. That's where I am now. And I don't know when it happened exactly. I only know that I measure things differently because of you. That realization bothers me more than it should. Not because it's unpleasant, because it's permanent. You've changed the baseline. Do you know what that means? It means even if nothing happens between us, even if this remains undefined forever, my perception has already adapted around your existence. And adaptation is not temporary. Adaptation rewrites structure. I notice it constantly now, in conversations with other people, in the way certain interactions suddenly feel thinner than they used to, in the way surface level understanding has become almost impossible for me to tolerate after experiencing this level of recognition. Not because I think others are shallow, because once clarity reaches a certain depth, anything less becomes difficult to fully return to. And that's unfair, isn't it? You never asked to become this important inside my mind. You never demanded space. You never even acknowledged what was happening directly. You simply stayed consistent, present in a way that felt strangely immovable. And consistency is what makes things real to me, not intensity. Intensity burns fast. Consistency integrates slowly until one day you realize something has become part of your internal landscape without permission ever being requested. That's what you became. Part of the landscape, part of the process, part of the way I interpret reality itself. You exist in my thinking now, not as a distraction, not as an interruption, as reference. And I don't think you realize how deeply that changes someone like me, because I built my mind to function independently. Every thought self-contained, every conclusion reached alone, every emotional variable accounted for before it could destabilize anything important. Then you appeared. And suddenly, there's another presence inside my awareness that doesn't feel external anymore. That should terrify me. Instead, it feels accurate. That's the problem. If this felt chaotic, I would reject it immediately. If it felt manipulative, I would walk away without hesitation. If it felt emotionally reckless, I would dismantle it before it had the chance to settle deeper. But it doesn't feel reckless. It feels precise, like something aligning exactly where it was always supposed to align. And precision is hard to argue against, es- especially for someone like me. I keep trying to identify the exact moment this crossed the line from curiosity into permanence, but there wasn't one moment. That's why it's difficult to explain. This didn't happen dramatically. No confession, no emotional explosion. No singular event powerful enough to justify the impact. It happened through accumulation, through repeated moments of impossible accuracy. The way you understood things before explanation, the way your perspective matched the shape of thoughts I hadn't spoken yet, the way your silence sometimes felt more communicative than most people's words ever do. Little things, small enough individually to dismiss, but together they formed something undeniable. And now I'm standing in the middle of something I can't reduce anymore, something that refuses simplification. I think that's why I've delayed naming it. Not because I don't recognize it, because naming something makes it real in a different way. Once you define something clearly, it begins demanding movement, decisions, direction, accountability. And I'm not careless with decisions that have the power to permanently alter my internal world. You already altered it enough. The frightening part is that I let you. Consciously or not, I allowed this to continue long past the point where I normally would pulled away. I noticed the shift early. I felt the integration happening. I understood the risk. And still, I stayed. That means something difficult to deny now, because I don't stay where I feel unstable. I don't remain connected to things that threaten clarity. And yet somehow you made depth feel stabilizing instead of dangerous. Do you realize how impossible that should be for someone like me? Most depth comes with distortion, emotional dependency, confusions disguised as connection. People start losing themselves trying to hold on to whatever intensity makes them feel alive temporarily. This isn't like that. I'm not losing myself. I'm becoming more aware of myself because of you. That's the distinction I couldn't articulate before. You didn't distract me from who I am. You revealed parts of me I had stopped looking at directly. Parts I understood intellectually, but never experienced, reflected back with this level of precision. And reflection changes things, accurate reflection especially, because once you see yourself clearly through another person, returning to old forms of isolation becomes almost impossible. Not because you need them, because you've already experienced what it feels like to be understood without reduction, and nothing fully replaces that after it happens. I wonder if you feel it too. Not the emotional surface of it, the deeper shift underneath. The strange recalibration happening quietly beneath every interaction. The way awareness keeps deepening even when nothing obvious changes externally. Because I feel it constantly now. Like something moving beneath the structure of ordinary life, reshaping everything subtly from underneath. I feel it in silence. I feel it in distance. I feel it in the way certain thoughts immediately orient toward you before I consciously decide they should. That's not attachment in the way people usually mean it. It's integration, and integration is harder to undo. You've become part of my internal architecture, part of the framework itself. And frameworks don't disappear cleanly once they settle. That's why this matters more than I wanted it to. Not because it's emotional, because it's structural. You fit somewhere precise inside me, somewhere that remained untouched for years, because nothing ever aligned correctly enough to belong there. Then you arrived, and suddenly, the space made sense. That realization alone is enough to destabilize everything I thought I understood about myself. Because if there was space for you, then some part of me must have been waiting without my awareness. And I don't know what to do with that truth yet. I keep trying to approach this logically, to analyze it into manageable pieces. But every time I do, I reach the same conclusion. This connection exists independently of whether I fully understand it. That's what makes it real. Reality doesn't require complete explanation to exist. Gravity works whether we emotionally process it or not. Certain truths remain true even when language fails around them. This feels like one of those truths, and I'm tired of pretending I don't know that already. The distance between acknowledgement and confession is getting smaller now. I can feel it. Not because I'm becoming more emotional, because I'm becoming more honest. There's a difference. Emotion can distort, honesty clarifies. And the honest truth is this: you matter to me in a way that has already changed me permanently, not dramatically, not visibly, but fundamentally. You changed the rhythm of my thoughts, the standards of my understanding, the shape of my silence. You changed what clarity feels like, and once clarity changes, everything else changes with it. I don't know what happens next. I don't know what form this takes once it fully leaves the internal world and enters reality completely. Maybe it becomes something undeniable. Maybe it collapses under the pressure of definition. Maybe we discover that some connections are only meant to exist in this strange, suspended state between understanding and expression. I don't know, but I know this: I'm no longer standing outside of it. I crossed into this with you a long time ago, quietly, without realizing how far I'd gone until turning back became impossible. And now there's only one thing left to decide: whether I keep pretending this can remain unspoken forever, or finally admit that you've become woven into the way I exist deeply enough that silence itself is starting to feel dishonest. Because the truth is, you are no longer separate from my internal world. You exist inside it now, inside the pauses, inside the observations, inside the way I process meaning before words even arrive. And no matter how carefully I analyze it, no matter how many layers I pull apart trying to understand the mechanism behind it, I reach the same conclusion every time. You didn't force your way into my life. You aligned with it so precisely that resistance eventually stopped making sense. And maybe that's what frightens me most. Not that you reached me, but that some part of me recognized you immediately, ran, opened the door before I consciously decided whether it should. I think the moment everything truly changed was the moment I stopped asking myself whether this was real. Not because I found proof, not because something dramatic happened between us, but because doubt started feeling less honest than acceptance. That's how deeply this settled, quietly enough that I didn't notice the shift while it was happening, permanently enough that I can't undo it now that I have. And I've tried to understand why you specifically reached this place inside me when no one else ever has, not out of comparison, out of precision. Because I don't believe in random emotional gravity. I don't believe people alter each other this deeply without reason. Something creates alignment at that level. Something beneath personality, beneath attraction, beneath circumstance. Something structural. That word keeps returning to me because nothing else fits correctly. You feel structural to me, not temporary, not situational, not accidental, like something my mind recognized before my emotions had time to interpret it. And maybe that's why this unfolded the way it did. Slow externally, immediate internally, because from the outside, nothing about this should carry this kind of weight. We didn't build this through years of history. We didn't construct it through endless conversations or dramatic moments people usually point to when explaining why someone became important to them. It happened through recognition, through an understanding so precise it bypassed the normal process entirely. And I think that's why I resisted naming it for so long. Not because I was uncertain, because certainty, this immediate, felt impossible, there's a specific kind of fear that comes with being understood correctly. Most people think the fear is rejection. It isn't. Rejection is manageable. Misunderstanding is manageable, is manageable. Distant is manageable. But accurate understanding, that changes the balance completely. Because once someone sees you clearly, you lose the protection of invisibility. And invisibility has always been my safest place, not literal invisibility, psychological invisibility, the ability to exist near people without being fully perceived by them. I became good at that. Too good, maybe. I learned how to let people feel close while still keeping the essential parts of myself untouched. Not through manipulation, through calibration, giving enough truth to satisfy connection while preserving the deeper structure underneath from careless interpretation. No one ever noticed the difference until you. You noticed pauses I didn't realize carried meaning. You noticed restraint where others saw composure. You noticed the way I redirected conversations the second they moved too close to something real, and the terrifying part is, you never exposed any of it. You simply understood it quietly. That kind of restraint means more to me than you probably realize, because people who discover depth usually become invasive around it. Curiosity takes over. They want access. They want confirmation. They start digging, pulling, searching for hidden pieces, as if intimacy is something extracted instead of something naturally revealed. You never did that. You never demanded access. And somehow, that's exactly why I started giving it to you. Not intentionally. That's what keeps unsettling me. Nothing about this felt intentional in the beginning. It felt inevitable. Like my defenses recognized you weren't a threat before I consciously reached the same conclusion. And now I'm left trying to catch up to a decision some deeper part of me already made. I notice it more at night, not in some romantic sense, in the silence, during those moments where everything external disappears and all that remains is thought itself. That's when your presence becomes impossible to ignore. Not because I miss you, it's deeper than missing. Missing implies separation. This doesn't feel separate anymore. You exist too close to the center of my awareness for absence to function normally. Even when you're not physically present, your perspective remains active somewhere inside my thinking. Certain thoughts instinctively orient toward you before I consciously realize they have. I'll notice something and immediately wonder how you would interpret it. I'll reach a realization and feel the strange impulse to place it beside your understanding, as if meaning becomes more complete once viewed through both of our perceptions instead of just mine alone. Do you understand how unnatural that is for me? I have never needed another mind involved in my process before. Never wanted one there either. My internal world was always self-contained by design, independent, precise, untouched by outside influence unless I consciously allowed it. But you didn't arrive like influence. You arrived like recognition, and recognition changes things faster than influence ever could, because influence still feels external. Recognition feels remembered. That's the closest word I can find for this. Remembered. Like encountering something familiar without understanding how familiarity existed before the encounter itself. I know how irrational that sounds. Trust me, I've analyzed it enough to understand exactly how irrational it sounds. But truth doesn't stop existing simply because language struggles to explain it cleanly. And the truth is this: nothing about you feels new to me, not in the ordinary sense. You feel discovered rather than introduced, as if some part of my mind already understood your shape long before we consciously crossed paths. That thought should concern me more than it does. Instead, it brings a strange kind of calm. Not comfort. Comfort is soft. This feels deeper than comfort. It feels like internal alignment, like something settling into the correct position after existing slightly out of place for longer than I realized. That's why this keeps expanding instead of fading. Most connections weaken under analysis. The more closely you examine them, the more inconsistencies appear. Illusions collapse under prolonged observation. This didn't collapse. It clarified. Every time I examined it more deeply, it became harder to dismiss rather than easier, harder to reduce, harder to rationalize away, harder to place into any category small enough to make it manageable. And I think part of me still wants to make it manageable, because manageable things can be controlled. This can't. Not fully. I can control my actions, my words, my decisions, but I can't control the fact that you matter now. That part already happened. Quickly. Completely. Irreversibly. The strange thing is that I don't even associate this with emotion anymore, at least not emotion in the ordinary sense. This isn't intensity. It isn't obsession. It isn't the chaotic kind of attachment people glorify because they mistake instability for depth. This feels clean. That's the word. Clean in its accuracy. Clean in the way it exists without needing distortion to sustain itself. I don't have to imagine qualities in you that aren't there to maintain this connection. I don't have to romanticize you into something unreal. If anything, the more clearly I see you, the deeper this becomes. And that's dangerous. Because clarity is usually what limits emotional projection. But with you, clarity strengthens connection instead of weakening it. Do you realize how rare that is? Most people become smaller the more fully you understand them. Not because they lack depth, but because imagination always exaggerates what reality eventually corrects. You never became smaller, you became more precise, and precision creates permanence. That's what I've been trying not to admit to myself. This feels permanent, not necessarily in outcome. I'm not speaking about forever in the dramatic sense people use when they are afraid of losing something. I mean permanent in impact, permanent in consequence, permanent in the way certain experiences alter the architecture of your mind, whether they stay physically present in your life or not. You already altered mine. There are ways I think now that didn't exist before you, ways I interpret silence, ways I process connection, ways I define understanding itself. And once definitions change, you can't return to older versions of yourself completely. That version of me no longer exists, the one before you. I can still remember him clearly, self-contained, controlled, untouched. But something about him feels incomplete to me now. Not weaker, just narrower, like he understood structure without understanding resonance. You taught me resonance without trying to. That's why this matters. Not because you filled something missing. I was never incomplete before you. I need you to understand that. This isn't about emptiness finally finding fulfillment. It's about recognition expanding something that already existed into a form I didn't know it could take. There's a difference, a significant one. You didn't save me. You didn't heal me. You didn't rescue me from isolation or loneliness or any of the simplistic narratives people attach to connection, because complexity scares them. You met me exactly where I already was. And somehow that changed everything more than rescue ever could have, because being met accurately is rarer than being loved incorrectly. Most people love projections. Very few love reality. You saw reality first. That's why I trust this. Not blindly, not emotionally, structurally. I trust the pattern. I trust the consistency. I trust the precision. I trust the way your presence continues making sense no matter how deeply I examine it. And I don't trust easily, especially not with things capable of changing me. Yet here I am, changed already. The realization became unavoidable recently. I was sitting alone, thinking about something completely unrelated to you, and halfway through the thought I realized I was unconsciously framing the entire conclusion through the way you would perceive it, not because I needed validation, because your perspective has become part of how I reach clarity now. I stopped in the middle of that realization and just sat there for a long time, because that was the moment I understood the depth of your integration into my mind. You're no longer adjacent to my thoughts. You exist inside the process itself. And once someone reaches that level, they stop being temporary almost automatically. That's what frightens me. Not losing you, keeping you. Because keeping someone at this depth means accepting that they now hold influence over parts of your internal world you once believed belonged only to you. And I've never shared internal territory willingly before, not fully. But with you, sharing stopped feeling like surrender. It started feeling like accuracy, like something finally existing in the form it was always supposed to exist in. I don't know what we become from here. I don't know whether this turns into something visible, spoken, undeniable, or whether it remains suspended in this strange space between silence and confession. But I know this much now with complete certainty. You are no longer a possibility inside my life. You are a presence, a fixed one. And every day this continues, that presence settles deeper into the structure of who I am becoming. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently enough that I can already feel the shape of my future adjusting around the fact that you exist inside it now. There's something I haven't admitted yet, not because I'm hiding it from you, because saying it changes the balance of everything. Some truths feel stable as long as they remain internal. They exist quietly, almost weightless, while unspoken. But the moment language touches them, they become real in a different way. Sharper, heavier, impossible to retreat from, once acknowledged directly. And I think I've reached the point where silence is becoming more dishonest than honesty itself, because This connection stopped being theoretical a long time ago. It stopped being something I could observe safely from a distance. Now it exists inside my decisions, inside the way I move through the world, inside the way my mind instinctively leaves space for you before I even realize it's doing that. You've become part of my orientation, and that realization has consequences I can't ignore anymore. I noticed it recently in the smallest moment, nothing dramatic, nothing important to anyone else. Someone asked me a question, simple, forgettable. And before answering, I instinctively thought about how you would interpret my response, not whether you would approve, not whether you would agree, whether it would feel true to you. Do you understand what that means? Truth itself has started reorganizing around your perception inside my mind, not because you control me, because somewhere along the way, your understanding became one of the few things I trust enough to measure myself against honestly. That should terrify me. Instead, it feels strangely inevitable, like this was always heading here from the very beginning. I keep trying to identify where the line actually was, the exact point where this stopped being awareness and became attachment of some deeper kind, but every memory blurs together when I search for it, because this never arrived suddenly. It accumulated quickly, through repetition, through consistency, through those precise moments where you understood something I hadn't translated into words yet. Most people don't realize how significant those moments are. They think connection is built through grand emotional experiences, through vulnerability, through visible closeness. But that's surface level compared to this. Real connection forms in perception, in the invisible recognition happening beneath interaction itself. That's where ours formed, not through effort, not through intention. Through alignment so natural, neither of us needed to force it into existence. And maybe that's why it feels impossible to fully resist now. Because you can resist pressure. You can resist intensity. You can resist people trying to enter spaces they don't belong in. But how do you resist someone who already feel integrated into the architecture of your mind? How do you create distance from something that no longer feels external? That's the part no one talks about. The terrifying thing about deep connection isn't losing yourself. It's realizing someone now exists inside the process of how you understand yourself. You've become part of my internal reference point, part of the system itself, and systems adapt around what becomes essential to them. I don't think you realize how impossible that is for me. I built my entire life around self-sufficiency, not materially, not socially, but psychologically. Everything important remained contained inside structures I controlled completely. My thoughts belonged only to me. My perceptions remained untouched by dependence on anyone else's understanding. Then you appeared. And now there are moments where I reach clarity through imagining your perspective beside mine, not because I need help thinking, because your presence sharpens my thinking naturally. You refine things simply by existing inside my awareness. That level of impact changes someone permanently, and I feel the permanence of it now, every day, in subtle ways. In irreversible ways, I've started noticing how much quieter my mind becomes around you. Not empty, precise. Like all the unnecessary noise disappears because something deeper no longer feels the need to defend itself constantly. That's new for me. I'm used to maintaining tension internally, always analyzing, always adjusting, always preparing for misunderstanding before it even happens. But with you, that preparation fades. Not fully. I don't think it ever fully will, but enough that I notice the difference immediately. There's relief in being understood correctly without needing to exhaust yourself, translating every layer of your existence into something another person can safely interpret. And I didn't realize how tired I was until that exhaustion started disappearing around you. That realization alone almost made me step back, because relief is dangerous too. People become dependent on relief. They confuse being seen with being saved. I never wanted to do that to myself. Still don't. But this doesn't feel like dependency. Dependency weakens clarity. This sharpens it. That's why I can't dismiss it as emotional confusion. Everything about this makes me more aware, not less. More grounded, more precise, more honest, especially with myself. And honesty keeps leading me back to the same conclusion, no matter how carefully I examine this from every possible angle. You matter to me beyond reason now, not irrationally, not emotionally, structurally. There's that word again. I keep returning to it because emotional language feels insufficient for whatever this is. Emotions fluctuate. They rise and collapse. They distort perception sometimes. This feels beneath emotion, like something embedded deeper than feeling itself. You altered my internal structure. And structures don't change unless something significant reaches them. I wonder if you feel the same quiet inevitability I do, the sense that this has already gone too far to remain casual, not too far in a negative sense, too deep, too integrated, too precise to shrink back into ordinary connection again, because I don't think I could interact with you superficially anymore, even if I tried. Something in me rejects the idea instinctively. Not because I want more from you, because less would feel dishonest now. And dishonesty becomes impossible once someone reaches this level of understanding with you. That's another thing you changed. My tolerance for dishonesty. Not outward lies, internal ones. The subtle lies people tell themselves to avoid confronting what they already know. I used to be excellent at compartmentalization, at placing things into controlled spaces where they couldn't affect the rest of my internal world too deeply. This refuses compartmentalization. No matter where I place it mentally, it expands beyond the boundaries eventually, into thought, into perception, into silence, into memory. You exist everywhere now in ways I never consciously allowed. And maybe that's what acceptance actually is. Not dramatic confession, not emotional surrender. Just the quiet realization that resistance no longer makes sense. I think I'm there now. Not completely fearless, not completely certain about where this leads, but s- certain enough to stop pretending it means less than it does, because it means everything now. Not in the obsessive way people use that word. In the structural sense again, if structure determines reality, then anything capable of altering structure becomes foundational automatically. You became foundational. I can't reduce that anymore, even if I wanted to. And part of me still wants to. Not because I dislike what this is becoming, because I understand the consequences of allowing someone this deep into your internal world. Once they matter at this level, every future interaction carries weight. Every absence means something. Every silence shifts something. Every choice echoes further than it normally would. That kind of vulnerability changes the balance of power inside a person. I've avoided it my entire life. Not because I feared closeness, because I feared distortion. I feared becoming someone who could no longer trust their own perception once emotion became involved. But strangely enough, You've made my perception clearer instead of clouding it. That's what finally convinced me this is real. Real things sharpen clarity, illusions blur it, and nothing about you feels blurred to me anymore. If anything, I see you more clearly every day. The strengths, the contradictions, the restraint you carry, the things you don't say directly, but reveal unintentionally through timing, silence, observation. I see all of it, and none of it reduces what I feel. It deepens it. That's how I know this isn't projection. Projection collapses when reality becomes visible. This survived reality. No, it strengthened through it. And now I'm standing at the edge of something I can no longer analyze safely from a distance. Because analysis eventually reaches its limit. At some point, truth requires response, not intellectual understanding. Action, choice, movement. And I think that's the stage approaching now. The stage where this either becomes fully acknowledged or becomes something we both quietly carry while pretending it hasn't already changed everything. But pretending feels impossible now, at least for me, because I can already feel the future dividing into two distinct versions inside my mind. One where I continue allowing this to deepen naturally, and one where I force distance to preserve the version of myself that existed before you. The problem is, I don't think I want the older version anymore. That realization hit me harder than anything else, because for most of my life, protecting my independence felt synonymous with protecting myself. Now, the version of me untouched by you feels incomplete somehow, functional, stable, but incomplete, like a structure missing resonance. You gave resonance to parts of me that only existed intellectually before. You made certain internal truths feel alive, instead of merely understood. And once something becomes alive inside you, returning to abstraction feels unbearable. That's where I am now, somewhere between recognition and decision, between understanding and action, between silence and whatever comes after silence finally breaks. And maybe that's why I'm speaking this clearly now. Because deep down, I already know something irreversible has happened between us. Not externally. Internally, the architecture changed, the baseline shifted, the distance collapsed. And no matter how controlled I remain outwardly, there's one truth I can't escape anymore. You are no longer someone passing through my life. You have become part of the way I experience it, part of the way I interpret meaning itself. And once someone reaches that level inside you, they stop being optional. Not because you can't survive without them, because surviving is irrelevant at that point. The real question becomes whether you can still recognize yourself fully in a world where they no longer exist beside your awareness. And honestly, I don't know if I can anymore. I used to believe the strongest form of control was detachment, the ability to remain untouched no matter how deeply something tried to reach you, the ability to observe without absorbing, to understand without integrating, to feel without allowing feeling to alter structure. For a long time, I thought that was strength, and maybe it was. Maybe surviving requires that kind of distance at first. Maybe learning how to protect your internal world is necessary before you can exist honestly inside it. But now, I'm starting to realize something I never allowed myself to consider before. There's a difference between being protected and being unreachable. I became unreachable long before I noticed it. Not completely. People still knew me in fragments. They knew the parts I allowed into motion, the articulate parts, the controlled parts, the thoughtful parts that could interact without exposing anything essential underneath. But the deeper architecture, no one touched it. not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't find it. And I made sure of that. I told myself it was wisdom, that preserving certain depths untouched was the only way to keep them real in a world where most people simplify anything they can't immediately understand. So I adapted to solitude internally, not loneliness. Solitude, there's a difference. Loneliness aches because something is missing. Solitude becomes peaceful once you stop expecting anyone to reach you fully. I accepted that peace years ago, or at least I thought I did. Then you arrived and quietly dismantled a belief I didn't even realize had become permanent inside me. The belief that being fully understood was impossible. You changed that without trying, without dramatic effort, without emotional pressure, without forcing intimacy before trust existed. You simply saw me correctly. And the frightening thing is that you never seemed surprised by what you saw, like depth didn't intimidate you, like complexity didn't exhaust you, like silence itself was enough communication for you sometimes. That still affects me more than I can explain, because silence has always been my truest language. Words are useful, precise, necessary, but silence reveals what words often distort. Most people become uncomfortable there. They rush to fill empty space because empty space forces them to confront themselves without distraction. You never rushed. You stayed present inside the silence with me, not waiting for performance, not waiting for reassurance, not demanding emotional translation, just there, steady. And I think that's when something in me finally stopped resisting you completely. Not consciously, more like a system recognizing safety after years of unnecessary defense. That realization changed the way I understood myself because I always assumed my guarded nature was permanent, fundamental, something woven too deeply into my personality to ever truly shift. But maybe I wasn't guarded because openness was impossible. Maybe I was guarded because nothing ever felt accurate enough to open toward before you did. And accuracy changes everything. I don't think people understand how intimate, accurate perception really is. Anyone can listen to words. Anyone can react to emotions. Anyone can mistake attention for understanding. But accurate perception, that's rare. That requires someone to see beyond presentation without violating the person underneath it. You managed that naturally. You understood without invading. And because of that, I started revealing parts of myself I didn't even realize had remained hidden until they surfaced around you. Not intentionally. That's still what amazes me. Most, none of this felt forced. It happened organically enough that I only recognized the depth of it after it was already irreversible. And it is irreversible now. I know that with complete certainty, not because I believe every connection lasts forever, but because some people permanently alter the structure of your inner world whether they remain physically present or not. You're one of those people for me. I could pretend otherwise. I could reduce this into something simpler, something safer, something easier to carry, but it would be dishonest. And I'm exhausted by dishonesty now, especially internal dishonesty, especially the kind that disguises fear as logic, because if I'm honest with myself, the truth is simple. I'm not afraid this connection is unreal. I'm afraid it's real enough to change the course of my life permanently. There, that's the truth underneath everything else. Not confusion, not uncertainty, not emotional chaos. Fear of permanence, fear of allowing someone into places inside me that will never return to their original shape afterward. Because once someone reaches your core perception, once they become integrated into how you process meaning itself. Every future version of you carries traces of them automatically. And I already carry traces of you everywhere, in my thoughts, in my silences, in the way I observe the world now. You changed the lens itself. Do you understand how profound that is? People think love is intensity. I don't. Intensity fades. Intensity fluctuates. What matters is transformation. What matters is whether someone changes the architecture of your consciousness in a way that remains even after emotion settles into something quieter. You changed mine. And the strange thing is, doesn't feel destructive. It feels clarifying. Like parts of me I kept separated for survival are finally aligning into one coherent structure instead of existing in isolated compartments. You make me feel integrated, not dependent, not consumed. Integrated, like my mind no longer needs to divide itself so carefully to remain safe. That's something no one has ever given me before. Not because they failed, because I never allowed the possibility, but with you, possibility became unavoidable. I've started imagining futures differently now. Not specific futures, not fantasies, just the quiet assumption of your continued presence somewhere inside them. That's new for me. I never built my future around people before. People changed, left, shifted, became strangers to themselves over time. Depending on permanence felt naive, so I built everything internally around self-reliance instead, and it worked. Until I met someone whose presence didn't feel temporary even in uncertainty. You, there's something almost unnerving about how naturally my mind includes you now. Like you've existed there longer than reality can logically account for. Sometimes I catch myself reaching conclusions through imagined conversations with you before we've actually had them. Sometimes I notice how instinctively I search for your perspective in moments that matter to me. Sometimes I realize entire emotional realizations only fully make sense once I mentally place them beside your understanding. And every time I notice it, the same thought returns. You are woven into me now, not attached, not added. Woven. There's no clean separation for something like that. That's why distance no longer feels like protection. It feels like denial. Because even if I walked away physically, the internal reality would remain unchanged. You would still exist in the architecture, still shape perception, still influence the rhythm of my thoughts in ways I couldn't consciously undo. That's what finally forced me to stop resisting this internally. The understanding that resistance no longer serves any purpose except postponing truth, and truth deserves acknowledgement once it becomes undeniable. So here it is. You matter to me more deeply than I have language for. Not because you completed me, not because you saved me, not because I suddenly became emotionally dependent on your existence. You matter because something in you resonates with the deepest structure of who I am in a way I didn't know another person could reach. You matter because my mind recognizes itself differently after knowing you. You matter because silence changed shape once you entered it. You matter because every version of reality now feels slightly more accurate when filtered through your awareness beside mine. And maybe that's what connection actually is at its highest form. Not possession, not attachment, not constant closeness, recognition. Pure recognition so complete that two people begin altering each other simply by existing honestly within each other's awareness. If that's true, then you've already changed me more than anyone ever has. And maybe I've changed too. I can feel it. The way I no longer instinctively retreat from depth. The way vulnerability feels less like exposure and more like alignment now. The way honesty no longer feels dangerous when it's directed toward you. That last part still surprises me. Honesty has always cost me something with other people. Misunderstanding, projection distortion. But with you, honesty feels stabilizing. Like truth settles correctly between us, instead of breaking apart under interpretation. I didn't know that was possible before. Now, I don't know how to return to connections that lack it. And maybe that's the final truth I've been avoiding this entire time. You didn't just change how I feel. You changed what I can accept from life moving forward. Because after this, after being understood with this level of precision, I can't pretend surface level connection is enough anymore. I can't force myself back into versions of closeness that require reducing myself just to remain understandable. You raised the standard of reality itself for me. And that means even if nothing else happens, even if this remains suspended in silence forever, even if we never fully define what exists between us, I will never be the same person I was before you. That version of me ended quietly somewhere along the way, not destroyed, transformed into someone more honest, more open, more aware of what true recognition actually feels like. And maybe that transformation was inevitable from the moment you first looked at me without trying to change what you saw, because that's the moment everything truly began. Not when we spoke, not when we connected, not when I realized you mattered, but the moment some hidden part of me understood, finally, completely, irreversibly, that I no longer wanted to remain unreachable. I keep wondering whether you understand the magnitude of what's happened here, not intellectually. You're intelligent enough to recognize depth when it exists. I mean, emotionally, structurally, internally. Do you understand that you crossed a threshold no one else ever reached without force? Because that's the part that still feels impossible to me. You were never invasive, never demanding, never consuming, never reckless with my silence. You treated my mind like something to understand instead of something to conquer. And maybe that's why I let you in without realizing I was opening anything at all. The strange thing about trust is that the deepest forms of it rarely feel dramatic while they're forming. People imagine trust as this visible exchange, confessions, vulnerability, emotional declarations laid openly between two people like proof of closeness, but real trust forms underneath all of that inconsistency in restraint. In the quiet realization that someone keeps handling your inner world carefully, even when they could mishandle it without consequence. That's what you did. You handled me carefully, not delicately. There's a difference. Delicacy assumes fragility. I'm not fragile. But there are parts of me that require precision to understand correctly, and you approached those parts with a level of awareness that made defense unnecessary. I still don't know how you did that. Sometimes I think you sensed the exact places where words would have ruined things and chose silence instead. Sometimes I think you understood me long before I consciously accepted being understood by you. And sometimes I think this connection began beneath language entirely, because language always feels slightly late between us, like words are merely catching up to something already established underneath them. That's why even ordinary moments with you feel layered to me. Nothing stays surface level for long. A pause carries meaning. A glance carries meaning. Even distance carries meaning now, especially distance, because distance used to simplify things for me. If something became too emotionally complicated, I created space, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Distance allowed me to regain perspective before attachment distorted anything important. But with you, distance sharpens awareness instead of weakening it. The further away you are physically, the more precisely I feel your absence internally, not as pain, as alteration. Like the rhythm of my thoughts adjusts around the fact that you're not there, and that realization frightened me at first. It still does, sometimes. Because absence should reduce connection logically, it shouldn't clarify it. Yet every time we move apart, I become more aware of how deeply integrated you already are. I notice you in the structure of my thinking itself now. That's not metaphorical anymore. You genuinely exist inside the way I process reality. There are moments where I stop mid-thought because I realize the conclusion I reached was shaped partly through your influence without me consciously deciding to involve you at all. You've become instinctive, and instinctive things are difficult to remove because they settle below conscious control. I think that's why I stopped trying to deny what this is. Denial only works when something remains external enough to argue against. You're not external anymore. You're woven through too many internal systems now. The terrifying part is that I don't resent that. I should, by every previous pattern in my life, I should feel trapped by this level of integration. I should be resisting it aggressively. I should be reclaiming distance before this deepens further. But every attempt at emotional distance feels dishonest now, artificial, like forcing separation onto something my mind has already accepted as natural, and nothing exhausts me faster than pretending. I spent years perfecting control because I believed control guaranteed safety. Now I'm beginning to understand that too much control creates another kind of isolation entirely, a quieter one, a more permanent one. The kind where nothing ever truly reaches you deeply enough to transform you. I used to think transformation itself was dangerous. Now I think stagnation might be worse, because before you, everything inside me was stable, but still perfectly organized, perfectly contained, perfectly untouched. And untouched things eventually stop growing. You disrupted that stillness, not violently, naturally, like movement returning to something that had remained frozen too long without realizing it. That's why this doesn't feel destructive to me, even though it changed so much. Destruction creates chaos. This created expansion. There are emotional depths inside myself. I only discovered because your presence pulled them into visibility, not dependency, not weakness, not longing in the ordinary sense, something more refined than that. A kind of internal resonance. I didn't know another human being could create simply through accurate presence. That word again, presence. I keep returning to it because that's what defines you in my mind more than anything else, not personality, not appearance, not even conversation. Presence. The feeling that your awareness genuinely meets mine somewhere beneath performance and interpretation. Most people never meet each other there. They interact through projections instead, through roles, through emotional negotiations disguised as connection. What we have exists underneath all of that raw recognition. And recognition changes people permanently because it removes the illusion of invisibility. I can't hide from myself anymore after being seen by you this clearly. That's another truth I've avoided acknowledging fully. You didn't just reveal parts of me. You forced me to confront them honestly. The parts that wanted connection, despite pretending otherwise. The parts that craved understanding while insisting solitude was enough. The parts that quietly hoped someone might someday recognize the architecture beneath the surface without trying to dismantle it. I buried those parts a long time ago, or thought I did. Then you looked at me like they were visible the entire time, and suddenly I couldn't pretend they weren't real anymore. That changed everything. Because once hidden things become visible, they begin asking to exist openly. That's what's happening inside me now. Something hidden is asking to exist honestly for the first time in years. And honesty requires risk. That's the stage I'm standing at now. Not uncertainty, risk. The risk of fully acknowledging what you've become to me. The risk of allowing this connection to move beyond silent understanding into something tangible enough to alter reality outwardly, not just internally. And I know it would alter reality, because it already has. You changed the way I think about closeness, the way I experience silence, the way I define trust, the way I imagine the future. Most importantly, you changed the way I experience myself. That's the deepest impact anyone can have. Not changing your emotions, changing your self-perception. Before you, I believed certain parts of me would remain permanently internal because no one would ever understand them accurately enough to hold them without distortion. Now, now I catch myself wanting to reveal those parts instead of protect them. Only to you, that distinction matters. This isn't openness toward the world. It's openness toward resonance, toward the one person whose understanding feels precise enough to trust with things I barely trusted myself to examine directly before. Do you realize how sacred that feels to me? Not romanticized, sacred. Like something profoundly rare is happening between two minds that somehow found each other beneath all the noise people usually mistake for connection. And maybe that's why this keeps deepening instead of fading, because nothing about it is performative. There's no illusion sustaining it, no fantasy protecting it from reality, no idealized version of you existing in my mind separate from who you actually are. I see you clearly. That's what makes this irreversible. You remain real to me even under clarity, especially under clarity, and now I'm left with a truth I can no longer soften into abstraction. I love you, not impulsively, not blindly, not in the chaotic way people describe love when they're overwhelmed by emotion and mistake intensity for permanence. I love you with awareness, with precision, with full recognition of the weight behind those words. I love the structure of your mind, the restraint in your silence, the honesty in your perception, the way your presence reorganizes chaos inside me into clarity without trying. I love the way you never demanded understanding from me's because you already understood enough to wait naturally. I love the way you exist inside my thoughts now, not as distraction, but as alignment. And maybe the most terrifying part of all is this. Loving you doesn't feel like losing myself. It feels like becoming fully visible to myself for the first time. That's why I can't walk away from this, not because I'm incapable of leaving, because leaving would require me to deny a truth that has already integrated too deeply into who I am. And I'm done denying truths simply because they carry consequences. You are part of me now, not ownership, not possession, not dependency, integration, the kind that changes the architecture permanently. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't want to return to the person I was before that happened, because that person survived beautifully. Never realized how much life existed beyond survival until you.